Minister Harris, 15 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And first thing I'd like to say, Las Cian Corla, is I understand, Deputy Kenny, why the people are applauding you, because you are highlighting tonight a very important issue, and engaging with you on this issue over the last week. I fully accept and understand your sincerity and your desire to try and do the right thing by Irish patients and by those suffering. So I thank you for the bill. I thank you for the opportunity that tabling the bill provides us tonight to try and debate and indeed progress a very important issue in relation to medicinal cannabis as well. And it's for that reason that I do not propose to move the reasoned amendment, which is on the order paper in relation to this bill, after the engagement that I've had with Deputy Kenny and Deputy Boyd Barrett during this week, because I think we found much common ground on the issue of medicinal cannabis. So I'd like to acknowledge at the outset that I believe this bill is very well intentioned. Deputies from across this House have met with patients and their carers who believe that medicinal cannabis should be available as a treatment option for various health conditions. And some of these conditions are extremely distressing for both the sufferers and for their carers. And I certainly recognise the urgency and the constant worry that they feel as they watch their loved one in pain that they believe could be alleviated. I too have met personally with a number of patients and indeed carers of patients who are seeking a change in legislation to permit use of medicinal cannabis in Ireland. And whilst I'm slow to name individuals, I too have had a number of meetings with Vera Toomey, and her passion and her determination to do well by her young daughter Ava is a story that has touched all of our hearts and made very clear to us in a very real and tangible sense how important this issue is to real families right around this country. And I thank Vera for her leadership in this regard too. I do believe there is a strength of feeling among the general public that the use of cannabis-based products should be allowed for the alleviation of symptoms associated with certain conditions. That's my own view too, and I acknowledge the numerous representations from members of the public and indeed from public representatives to my own department reflecting this. I share Deputy Gino Kenny's concerns for patients who believe that medicinal cannabis should be a treatment option, and I've expressed this to Deputy Kenny and his colleague Deputy Boyd Barrett when we met earlier this week to discuss this bill. I share the view that medicinal cannabis could play an important role in alleviating pain and suffering, subject to medical advice. I also do, as won't come as a surprise to the Deputy, have significant and serious issues with parts of this bill, parts that I don't take lightly and I will return to in my speech for the record of this House later. Firstly, though, I'd like to set out some of the facts that I think we have to consider in addressing this important issue. The issue of the use of cannabis as a medical treatment is quite complex, and there are a range of views among the general public and the medical and scientific community. Medicinal cannabis is a broad term referring to the use of part of a dried cannabis plant material or products which have been manufactured from chemicals known as cannabinoids, extracted from the cannabis plant for medical treatment. It's important to clarify that the cannabis plant contains a range of cannabinoids, some of which are psychoactive, meaning they affect the mind, and indeed some which are not. The substance apart, commonly known as THC, for example, is a psychoactive cannabinoid, whereas cannabidiol, commonly known as CBD, is not in fact psychoactive. Under Irish law currently, cannabis is considered to be a drug of abuse and is controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act. Cannabis is the most widely used illegal drug, and I think that most people in this House would acknowledge that there are significant concerns about the recreational use of cannabis, particularly among young people. And apart from being illegal, there is a body of research linking cannabis to certain mental health problems. Under current legislation, cannabis and products which contain THC or its related derivatives are subject to strict controls, as members will know. Cannabis is prohibited other than in specified circumstances where all activities relating to cultivation, manufacture and supply of cannabis and products containing THC are subject to licence. CBD is not controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act. While cannabis is not viewed under Irish legislation currently as a product having medicinal use, it is currently open for an Irish registered doctor to apply for a licence for cannabis-based preparations for an individual and an individually named patient. Such applications can be considered and are on a case-by-case basis. A number of families campaigning on the medicinal cannabis issue would be aware of this provision, which would allow a doctor to apply for a licence, and I do feel the need to highlight and reiterate that option that is available here this evening. While many countries have the same current approach as Ireland, a number of countries have introduced changes to their drugs legislation to remove some prohibitions in order to permit the medicinal use of cannabis in certain circumstances. In Europe, countries where such changes have been introduced include the Netherlands, Croatia, Malta, the Czech Republic. Denmark and Germany have also recently announced their intention to progress similar changes. And beyond Europe, schemes for medicinal access have been introduced in Australia, in Canada, in Israel and in a number of states in the United States. Internationally, the schemes in place are focused primarily on controlling the quality and supply, principally of dried cannabis for medicinal use, as prescribed by a doctor. Other than synthetic cannabinoids and Sativex, countries have not authorised medicinal cannabis as a medicine due to the limitations of currently available clinical data on safety and effectiveness. I believe, Cahirlock, that Ireland should now consider how we might make medicinal cannabis available as a treatment option for certain conditions in this country. However, as Minister for Health, as all deputies and patients will appreciate, I do have a duty to carefully consider the evidence and to follow the views of the medical expertise available to me. And for that reason, I have taken action. On the 3rd of November, a few weeks ago, I commenced an official review of policy on medicinal cannabis, and I've requested the Health Products Regulatory Authority, the HPRA, to provide me with expert advice. The HPRA's statutory role is to protect and enhance human health by regulating medicines and other health products. It has clinical and scientific expertise which will contribute significantly to this review. Specifically, I have asked the HPRA for an overview of products that have been authorised in other countries, the wider ongoing and emerging clinical research in new indications, the different regulatory regimes in place in countries which allow cannabis to be used for medicinal purposes, and the legislative changes that would be required to allow the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes in Ireland. This review is being progressed as speedily as possible, and I have asked the HPRA to conclude this by the end of January. Deputies should be aware that this review is of the highest priority for the HPRA, and they've reflected that to me, and they have convened a working group to include input from clinicians actively practising in the therapeutic areas in which cannabis is believed to be of benefit. So this is a priority issue for me, and it is a priority issue for the HPRA, and I hope and expect to receive their advice by the end of January. It is a difficult task, as this is a complex issue which needs to be appropriately dealt with so that the needs of all of the patients in Ireland who may benefit from medicinal use of cannabis can be considered. The review also needs to take account of any concerns that have been expressed in relation to potential harm from exposure. I would remind deputies that in other countries where medicinal cannabis has been authorised, it is made available only on the basis of a prescription from a doctor. The appropriateness of any particular treatment is a matter between a patient and their doctor, and I think that's a very important relationship here in this country. And my understanding is that at present many Irish doctors would be quite cautious about recommending a cannabis-based treatment for a patient in the absence of robust clinical evidence which underpins authorised medicines. It is therefore very important that we do listen to the voice of the medic, as I know the deputies wish to in this debate, and that's why I particularly welcome the role of the clinicians in the HPRA's review. I also know that the joint Oireachtas Committee on Health, under the chairmanship of Deputy Dr Michael Harty, who is present here, is also examining the issue of medicinal cannabis, and I know you recently held hearings on that and heard from a wide range of views, which I think has been very informative, and I look forward to receiving the output of your work alongside the HPRA's report by the end of January. And I think if we get to the end of January and we can have the HPRA's report and we can have the report of the Oireachtas Health Committee and be informed by this debate here this evening, I think we'll be then in a position to consider future policy and to progress any legislative changes that may be recommended. I've already acknowledged that Deputy Kenny and his colleagues have brought forward this legislation with the intention of helping patients who may benefit from medicinal cannabis. I share the concerns of patients and their carers who believe that cannabis should be a treatment option. And while I am anxious to proceed as quickly as possible, and I've outlined to the House my timeline, my preference is to have the expert advice before deciding on any possible changes to legislation. I think that makes sense. By the end of January, we will have that advice. Whilst not wishing to preempt the HPRA report, I think it's worth remembering too that the possibility exists that it may not recommend the need for new primary legislation. It could well inform me that I can make the necessary changes through statutory instrument under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and this could well be the quickest way, whilst not preempting the outcome, this could well be the quickest way of trying to make medicinal cannabis available to Irish patients. So I think we have a common aim here across the House to try and make medicinal cannabis products available to Irish patients on the basis of a doctor's clinical view. And when we get to the end of January, we'll have that advice, and I assure the House I will act quickly on that advice. I know this is an important issue for many families. I did at the outset say that there are some elements of this bill that I do have serious concerns with, and I've discussed them with Deputy Kenny and with Deputy Boyd Barrett. And it's in particular the amendments in section 42 of the bill which remove cannabis and its derivatives from the schedule and various sections of the Misuse of Drugs Act. This would in effect mean that cannabis would no longer be a controlled drug and possession for recreational use would not be an offence. And I think and accept that this is an unintended consequence, as I heard Deputy Kenny say this morning on radio, of the legislation. It is an issue I believe we should address to rectify if this bill progresses this evening, as I hope and expect it will. I've always made clear that medicinal cannabis is a completely different debate, in my view, to the issue of recreational cannabis. We're here tonight talking about how we can help patients, how we can help their families, how we can help alleviate suffering. And the debate about recreational cannabis is an entirely different matter, and indeed one in which I'd have a very different view to that view I hold in relation to medicinal cannabis. I believe most members of this House indeed could be concerned if inadvertently we ended up legalising cannabis for non-medicinal purposes. That's not what this debate here is about tonight, but that's why I just need to highlight that unintended consequence within this legislation. So, as I said, I understand there is a willingness on behalf of the Deputy to amend the draft legislation to ensure that we are just dealing with the issue of medicinal cannabis. Another issue of concern is that the bill as proposed would provide for two new agencies, the Cannabis Regulation Authority and the Cannabis Research Institute. In my view, there is genuinely no need to create new quangos, and if a decision is taken to change the regulatory regime for medicinal cannabis, I think the appropriate agency to oversee this would be the HPRA. This is the agency that has the statutory role, and it has an experience in the protection of human health in respect of medicines and other health products. The HPRA is already the statutory regulator for controlled drugs. It's already the body that regulates our medicines. So if this is to become another medicinal product, I think it's appropriate that that would sit under the umbrella of the HPRA, and I think there's an openness from deputies to engage also in relation to that, because a lot of roles set out in the proposed bill for the new agencies I do genuinely believe would be appropriate to the HPRA, and that could negate the need for us to establish any more agencies for regulation of medicinal cannabis that would obviously come at an additional cost to the state. I think we need to do this in as simplified a manner as possible using the existing authorities as well. So these are my concerns about the bill that I put on the record of the House this evening. However, on the central objective of the bill, and the reason I think there's so many people here this evening and the reason so many people are following this debate so closely, is because people have a desire to have access to medicinal cannabis products. And as I've said, I truly do accept and thank the Deputy for putting forward this bill. I accept your bona fides on this, and I share your desire to make progress on the matter. I think there clearly is much common ground on all sides of the House between people in all parties and none. So that is why, despite having significant objections to some elements of the bill which I've outlined, I think it would send the wrong message to so many people who have contacted us all with their personal stories, who want to see action and want to see the Dáil move forward on this issue, to divide the House on the issue. And that's why I don't intend to oppose this bill at second stage. I think this bill can pass at second stage. It should pass at second stage to send a strong message to the people of Ireland, to the patients of Ireland, to their families and their carers, that we want and intend to see progress in this area, with the caveat that I put in as Minister for Health that I need to receive the HPRA advice, the clinical, scientific, medical advice, before I be in a position to act, and I expect to receive that at the end of January. I have to have due regard to my duties and obligations as Minister for Health, and I do therefore stress the importance of me receiving those recommendations from the HPRA before we would perhaps move the bill onto the legislative scrutiny stage at committee. I'm hopeful that these recommendations, though, would coincide with the output of the committee's own deliberations. Deputies, I do genuinely believe we're all united in wanting to do the best for patients here. But we will achieve the best for patients by acting on the best advice. That is why I have, for the first time in this country, initiated an expert medical review of medicinal cannabis. I really do look forward to receiving it as quickly as possible and having it very early in the new year, and I will act on its recommendations with a view to trying to make medicinal cannabis available to patients in this country. I also, though, look forward to sharing it with the Oireachtas colleagues so that we can all proceed to the right solution in the best interests of patients. So I thank you for this debate. I thank you for the opportunity you've provided in tabling this to inform the people of Ireland, the patients of Ireland, my intentions in this regard, and I look forward to working with people on all sides of this House to try and make progress on this issue. Minister Harris, thank you. So we